Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual public engagement strategies for underserved communities webinar. My name is Hannah Stelmakovich. I'm going to be your webinar moderator today, and I'm a program manager with the Institute for Local Government. A few housekeeping items and a few Zoom tech items. You are all remaining on mute for the duration of the event. You have questions and answers box activated on the bottom of the screen. During this webinar, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box at any time of the session. Our wonderful panelists will answer some of the questions after their presentations, and then we'll have a nice facilitated discussion and Q&A session after the presentations. And this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording to the webinar as well as the PowerPoint in our follow-up email. Okay, so what we're doing on today's webinar, we're going to have some instant polling for you at the beginning. Then we're going to continue with our content. We're going to talk about what public engagement is and what do we mean by public engagement. We're going to set the context with the virtual strategy, what virtual strategy, public engagement virtual strategy is and why do it. Then we're going to continue with our interesting and very exciting case studies from Monterey and the Merced. They're going to talk a little bit about how they engage their community in virtual world and what lessons they have learned and lessons they're going to share with you. We're going to have a nice, robust panel discussion, so please contribute with some questions for the panel discussion in the Q&A box. And then we're going to address some of the questions. There's a lot of you on this webinar, more than 200 people. So we'll address some of the questions during our Q&A session, and then we'll adjourn. A little bit about Institute for Local Government. I hope all of you on the line are familiar with us. And in case you're not, we are a nonprofit statewide organization. We are education and training affiliate of 3 local government associations, Cal Cities, California Special District Association, and California State Association of Counties. Together with our affiliates, we serve more than 2,500 local agencies, cities, counties, and special districts. What do? We provide easy and practical resources so local agencies can effectively implement policies and programs on the ground. A few words about Institute for Local Government, or ILG. We have 4 program areas, including leadership and governance, civic education and workforce, sustainable and resilient communities, and public engagement program. And again, education and training, something that we do. This webinar is part of the services that provide. We also provide technical assistance, capacity building, convenience. We're here to help. We're here to help local government leaders to navigate complexities, increase capacity, and build trust in their communities. In our public engagement program, or what we call public engagement pillar, what we do here, we focus on embedding authentic, effective, and inclusive public engagement practices that encourage greater public trust and confidence in local government, while also helping local jurisdictions achieve their goals. We do recognize that local government leaders, you are in your work, everyday work, you face a number of complex and evolving challenges. And again, to govern effectively, to build that trust in the community, everything is impossible without a foundation of strong government. And that foundation is trust, accountability, responsiveness, transparency, and equity. And hopefully from today's webinar, you will learn from our presenters and from ILG staff some of the elements of public engagement virtual strategies that help you to build that trust, accountability, responsiveness, equity, and transparency in your community when you engage your residents. One of our important piece of public engagement pillar or program, something that we have developed more than 6 years ago, and it's still very relevant, is public engagement framework that we call TIERS. And TIERS stand for Think, Initiate, Engage, Review, and Shift. And back to that trust building, accountability accountability component. Tiers framework is a 5-pillar step framework that allows you to develop and implement your public engagement plans and strategies in a more inclusive and meaningful and thoughtful manner. The framework is online, as well as a lot of templates and resources. Please check it out and feel free to use it for any of your public engagement projects, no matter how big or small they are. Okay, so who do we have on the line today? Today, we put together for you a very exciting panel with tons of experience and interesting cases and lessons learned. We have Nat Rojanasathira, Assistant City Manager with the City of Monterey. Nat, I hope I nailed your last name. Thank you. We have Jennifer Flachman with the City of Merced. Jennifer is a Senior Management Analyst and Public Information Officer. Jennifer, you're wearing multiple hats. Kudos to you. We have Michelle Stevens. She's Enterprise Account Executive and Head of Planning Practices with the Engagement HQ at Granicus. And finally, we have my colleague on the line, Roberto Torres. He's a Senior Program Manager working in Public Engagement Pillar with the Institute for Local Government. Okay, this is who are on the line in terms of our presenters. Let's see who is on the line in our participants. And there's going to be a few instant polling questions. We're going to ask you what type of agency are you with, what is your role with the local government, and how well does your local agency engage your community? Let me go ahead and launch that poll. I'm going to stop share for a second. I'm going to launch the first question. What type of agency are you with? I love the results are coming in. The numbers are changing so fast. There are a lot of you on the line. Okay, most of your answers, 45% are with the city, 17% with the county, 9% with special district, 7% with nonprofit, 9% with state agency, and 13% other. Let me share the results. Thank you for sharing. Let me go with the next question. What is your role with local government? What is your role with the local government? Okay, most of you participated. I'm going to end the poll and show you the results. Okay, so most of your staff on the line, welcome. We have a few elected appointed officials, welcome as well. Consultants, good to see you here. I assume you guys already know a lot, but hopefully there's going to be a few aha moments today. Executive staff, department heads, 9%, welcome. We have 6% others and 7% non-applicable. And here are the results. Okay, and the very last question is coming up. How well does your agency engage your community? Be honest here. The polling is anonymous. Almost all of the answers are in. And the rest of you, I assume you're still assessing how well does your agency engage your community. Okay, let me end the poll and share the results. Here you are. So 6% of you are experts. We engage all the time, and I assume that excellent jobs. So that 6%, please feel free to drop your information in the Q&A. I'm going to recruit you for the next webinar. We have 36% who are saying good. We do a decent job. You know, that's excellent. Engagement is not easy, so decent job is still a good job. So we could do better. That's okay. And we're all still learning how do we pivot, how do we adjust, and how do we engage to build transparency and trust. 9% of you are still learning, getting started. This is a great webinar for that learning component. 3% non-sure, and 3% non-applicable. All right, well, thank you for participating in our Zoom poll. Let's continue with our presentation. Okay, I just wanted to set a context to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what do we mean when we say public engagement. What we've noticed in the field, ILG, and I hope most of you are noticing that as well, we're using public engagement terms interchangeably with civic engagement, public information and outreach, and potentially marketing and advertisement. There's a few differences between, semantical differences between all these terms. So when we say civic engagement, yes, we are engaging the community, but we're mostly involving them in political life and civic life of our community. Community political canvassing, planting the garden, volunteering for the river cleanup. Yes, community, they're engaged, but they are engaged in civic activities. We do a lot of public information and outreach to educate our communities on various topics, to spread the information about city, county, special district work, as well as to invite people to your public engagement events. Public information and outreach, it's one-way local government communication to inform your community. You're just sending information out. Marketing and advertising is actually part of the public engagement, but actually it's a promotional message disseminated across communication channels, again, just to inform the community. Marketing and communication is often paid. And if you want to do authentic, meaningful community engagement, and if you're choosing your marketing and advertisement tactics, community knows that, community feels that, community knows when you're engaging authentically versus you're pushing, selling, promoting through marketing and advertisement. And finally, at the Institute for Local Government, when we say public engagement, we mean a broad range of methods to inform and gather input. In a way, it's a two-way communication with your residents, with your community. It's a way to have dialogue. You send the information out, you inform, you educate, but also you're asked for some type of feedback and input. It can be quick input from surveys and polls, or it can be deeper conversations at the table where community really talk about their concerns, propose solutions to different projects, and you together work through those solutions and alternatives to make sure the final project, plan, program really meets the needs of the community and reflect their voices. What do we mean when we say authentic public engagement? We definitely mean inclusive. We're doing intentional outreach to engage folks who don't traditionally participate, and we're figuring out some alternative tools and methods to engage them, to reach them. Authentic public engagement is accessible public engagement. We're figuring out folks who don't traditionally participate, who have a number of challenges and barriers to participate. How can we overcome those challenges and barriers? Authentic public engagement is dialogue-based. It's a two-way communication where we have a dialogue with our community. We're going beyond the transactional, give me your input and, stay tuned for updates on the website. It's a little bit more, it's a deeper engagement. And finally, authentic public engagement is culturally competent, especially in California when we have so many ethnicities, so much diversity. We all have different mini cultures, micro cultures, macro cultures. So you as a project engagement lead or staff, you're trying to figure out with your community the relevant materials and messages that's going to resonate with various groups. Advantages of virtual engagement, something I hope you experience in your field. We've been in this for more than 2 years. A lot of you are seeing increase in scale and participations. People are just more available to participate versus in person. It takes us 5 minutes to hop on the Zoom. It's not too bad. You are reaching people who haven't traditionally attended your in-person events. In virtual public engagement is cost effective because the staff time we spend less time for travel, food expense, whatnot. And virtual public engagement just gives you a lot of data and analytics capabilities where all these different platforms and tools run the numbers for you. There's a lot of digital tools on the market. For those of you who, most of you are doing digital engagement, most of you are familiar with a lot of those tools. And what ILG did with this slide, we broke those tools based on where you are on the IEP2 spectrum. And IEP2 spectrum is International Association of Public Participation. They have a spectrum that talks about where you are with your community engagement goals. On the left side of the spectrum, on the inform, you're just sending information out and promoting your events, educating community on XYZ. On consult, involve, collaborate, that's where you start your dialogues with the community, from quick feedback in the consult phase to deeper conversations in the collaborate phase. And then power phase is where community is actually tasked with final decision making. Again, a lot of tools. It's up to you. It's up to your agency, depending on your staff time, budget, timeline. The most important, your engagement needs, how contentious the issue is. You can pick and choose the tool that works for your specific project. But just we wanted to let you know there's a lot of tools. In our case studies from Merced and City of Monterey, they will share a little bit about tools that they use and how those tools worked for them. Okay, this is a little bit of context setting in terms of what public engagement is, what's the benefits of virtual public engagement, where we are with all our virtual and digital tools in this in 2022. What do we have available to us? I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Michelle Stevens. She's Enterprise Account Executive and Head of Planning Practices with Engagement HQ that is now part of Granicus. And Michelle will continue this conversation about virtual engagement strategies, why do this, and what we need to pay attention to. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to switch our view to the speaker view. Michelle, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Hannah. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, you've all made it to a webinar about virtual public engagement to learn more about strategies that can support a meaningful connection with all members of your community. And at the conclusion of this webinar, I challenge you. I challenge you to take one concept you learn here today and share it with at least one of your peers, whether that's Slack or email, scheduling a call, social media, going for a walk, or maybe having dinner with someone. Share that idea and discuss it. Why am I asking you to do this? I'm asking you to share your takeaway from an afternoon webinar on virtual first engagement strategies. But why? Pretty straightforward answer, really. Oh, that's not the right one, is it? Am I clicking happening?
Those are your emails, Michelle.
I know, right? Like, I'm just asking you to share it so that you can send it to all your friends. Just checking. I'm asking you to share these because that is how community is formed. By identifying something I care about, in this case, community engagement, and then asking you to share it with others, and asking them to share it with others, and asking them to share it with others, and so on, to exponentially grow awareness in my message or my initiative or an opportunity, etc. That is what forms community. Well, at least one of those ingredients for forming community. A common interest, an easy and inclusive access to that conversation, a shared network of people connecting on shared interests. And that principle of compounding growth is one of the reasons we lead with digital or virtual, digital first engagement or virtual first engagement. Before COVID, we had a long conversation about how these strategies worked, partnership, in person and digital. As we leave the pandemic and enter this new phase, we know that we've learned that we can't do engagement without a digital or virtual component. It helps us efficiently reach more folks, and that's why we lead with digital. That is, of course, given the full caveat of virtual does not reach everyone in your community. Instead, virtual allows us to see a higher return on our engagement efforts, a potential reduction in staff time, but more importantly, streamlined opportunities for engagement and efficient ways to identify insights to make community-informed decisions. Today, our panelists will share their stories on engagement, and I'm so excited to hear them. They're going to share how they led with digital to reach more people, to use resources mindfully, make data-driven decisions, all through their use of an online engagement platform, in this case, Engagement HQ. Some of you may be familiar with Engagement HQ as Bang the Table, but last summer we joined the Granicus family, and my colleague Emily and I are available to share more about how Engagement HQ can be connected with your other Granicus solutions that you may be using. But today, as I only have about 7 minutes left with you, I'm going to share step 4 of my 10-step engagement checklist. And if step 4 resonates with you, I'd be happy to come and share about all of the engagement steps within this checklist with your team. I'm a city planner with over 20 years of community engagement practice who cares deeply about engagement and making it easier to reach, listen, and incorporate the views of all the members of your community to make the world a better place. So I want to make sure I can bring that message to everyone. But let's dive into our topic. So all 10 steps are important, but defining the audience is a good place to start when we're talking about how we build a comprehensive engagement strategy that leads with digital, but makes a defined effort to reach voices from underserved communities. Finding folks and ensuring their contributions are respected as part of developing and maintaining a trusted relationship that builds community is not easy work. No one here on the call will tell you that it was easy. But that developing, finding those folks and ensuring those contributions are respected and part of your process is important work. Thank you for being here today. And thank you for doing the hard work. It really does make a difference. Of course, formulating an engagement strategy is an iterative process. And when we get to step 4, defining our audience, we likely have some known factors or context to develop our strategy around. This may include a defined problem or challenge we're seeking the community's help in finding solutions, or seeking help, additional information from our community to better understand the challenges they are facing. We may also have defined our measure of success or include our audience in the creation of those performance metrics. What does success or completion look like? Is it quantity, quality, representation? What is the reason that you are engaging? Why are we engaging the community? If you're familiar with the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2, and Hannah mentioned this previously, are we looking to inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or empower our audience? Digital supports all of these. And knowing the answers, or at least starting with the plan, is necessary to ensure inclusive and respectful consultations. The what and the why formulating, we're ready to define our who. Who is the audience? As part of defining a successful strategy, we need to know who we want to hear from, as well as who we need to hear from. And it never hurts to start with an awareness of who we know we'll hear from. Then we make a list and ask, how will I reach this audience and this particular member? What channels and when and how often? So a series of really deep insights of spending time developing that strategy and asking yourself these questions. Determining what barriers might be present and how you will address those is another important step to ensuring you are creating an inclusive and accessible engagement process. For example, if you want to pay members of your community to be digital ambassadors, to go on the street and help bridge that digital divide, or members of your community for their time when they participate, what policies do you need to be aware of? Are there restrictions, paperwork required? How will your champions get paid? What if they don't have checking accounts? Is your agency supportive of using gift cards or cash? How does that impact your timeline or additional paperwork that may be required? Do you have the hardware needed if you're going to be using digital on site or creating a hybrid approach? And if you're using paper, how will you transfer that information into your digital tools, or will you? Continuing to think about the end product your reporting needs as while you're formulating your strategy is one of those important steps to ensuring an inclusive conversation with your community. Once we've made that list, which helps to then ask someone else to look at it, and then ask someone else to look at it. Remember, this is a network of folks who are here to help us. And it helps us to identify any ideas for who else should be involved, to better understand the barriers to their participation and identify ways to mitigate those barriers. I like to share my pre-strategy and strategy as it is developed with my catalysts, my representatives, and anyone else who may be interested. That is transparency. If people are asking questions, that is exciting for you. Don't maybe not take it as another person asking me questions. That's an opportunity for you to share the message and to have more people join your team and spread the word about the good work that you're trying to accomplish. Asking for help is another important step. It's okay to not know how to find communities that have been left out of the conversation, but it is not okay to continue to leave them out of that conversation. Build a network by sharing, asking, reporting back, and keeping that conversation momentum moving forward. You will make mistakes. We all do. Acknowledging them and beginning to rectify any harm is part of why digital works, because you can quickly pivot and focus those resources where they need to be. This may mean a change to your strategy, resource allocation, critical path, etc., and that's okay. When you invite people into a process, the expectation is that they will have ideas and concerns, and a well-designed engagement process will be adaptable. I know our panelists will tell you more about how they've pivoted in their experiences today. Iteration is part of the process and is one of the best parts of digital. When you lean into a digital-first engagement approach, you can address missteps. You can fix a spelling error or add a new forum topic in the middle of the night. You can try new techniques and empower staff with minimal resource investment and receive real-time results that demonstrate the success of your efforts with both quantitative and qualitative reporting. It's really, really important that we remember to report back to our community about what we heard, what we did with their input, and how we're going to move forward to continue that conversation. Relationships don't occur with a one moment, they occur over time. And when we go to our communities with a heavy lift without having done the groundwork, we're not being respectful. It's important to keep the conversation moving. So continuing to engage with folks when there isn't a big decision is part of that. And using digital allows you to do those kind of low touch or low impact conversations, as well as those high impact conversations. And digital allows you more time to build those relationships on topics that maybe aren't the spicy ones. By centralizing your participant database, your communication tools, reporting and insights, all within an engagement platform, it helps make staff more willing to use that, as well as creates an easy place for your community to engage on any of the topics. They have the same patterns, that same approach, and they don't need to learn a new tool. And this is, of course, especially important for some of our staff who maybe are not full-time web designers, and they are managing many different projects as many different needs. And so creating an easy way for your engagement activities to be monitored, reported on, and involve as many folks as possible is part of that solution and why we use digital first. Thank you so much for your time. Please add your questions to our question tool or our chat. And now I'd like to hand it back to Hannah to take us to our next speaker.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, for taking us back before we start engaging, before we start figuring out what digital strategy we're going to use, what tools we're going to use. We need to pause and figure out who we're trying to reach. Who are those folks in your communities who haven't been traditionally not engaged, have been left out of the decision-making, marginalized communities, and all those different questions. It's your thinking exercise, so you can design those digital engagement strategies with intentionality and equity in mind. I'm going to share my screen just very briefly to introduce our next speaker. Okay, so we are diving into actual case studies, actual work on the ground, what I call boots on the ground. And next we're gonna have Ned Rojanasathira. He's Assistant City Manager with the City of Monterey. And I'm gonna pass it to Ned.
Great, thanks so much, Hannah. I appreciate it. And a pleasure meeting you all and being part of this panel today. As Hannah mentioned, I'm Assistant City Manager for the City of Monterey, and I've been here for just over 3 years. This is my 20th year in public service, started in Pacific Grove and spent 12 years in the town of Danville on the East Bay. And part of my work as Assistant City Manager includes public engagement. And of course, we have our Public Information Officer as well, who is part of our office and has done outstanding work in this area. What I'd like to do is share the case study focusing on our recent efforts to move to district-based elections. And this took place recently over in, we received a letter from LULAC, very much driven and not only from the right thing to do, but also a legal requirement of having information available in Spanish because of the percentage of residents in Monterey who are not English speakers who are over 5 years of age. And this was part of the requirement, as some of you and as cities or public agencies have been forced or have moved voluntarily to district-based elections. So back in October of last year, the city of Monterey received a demand letter from the League of United Latin American Citizens, also known as LULAC, to move from at-large elections to district-based elections. For over 170 years, the city of Monterey has always been had at-large elections since 1850. And this was a major shift in our process. And of course, gathering feedback from the community members, we needed to make sure we were doing so in an inclusive way and looking at various demographics. So I'll have a couple of slides to share with you as we walk through some of our experience. This is an overview of the ultimate district map that was adopted by our city council. City of Monterey, population of just over 30,000 residents, and here in Monterey County and on the coast, we're borders Pacific Grove, Pebble Beach, Seaside, Delray Oaks, and unincorporated Monterey County. We took a look at the demographic shift. This was part of the decision-making process as council decided to inevitably move forward with district-based elections, but also in terms of how would we engage with the community and connect with the population. And you can see what's very helpful before going through any process, let alone district-based elections, any engagement process, is understanding who your demographic is. So we, as you can see here, some growth in the Latino, Hispanic, Latinx population, 12% roughly. And this is, of course, based on citizen voting age population. So we have roughly 22,000 citizen voting age compared to over 30,000 residents. But 12% Latino, 6.9% Asian, 3.7% Black. And that was helpful for us to be able to see. And you can see the growth if you take a look here at from 2010 to 2020, a slight increase in Latino and about the same in terms of Asian and Black. And that helped us recognize that 12% is significant. And how do we reach out to the Latinx population? So one of the strategies that we did was not only having information available both in Spanish and English, but also making sure that we had advertisements not only in the English language newspapers in the area that included the Monterey County Herald, which is our daily newspaper, but and the Monterey County Weekly, the weekly publication that's free. It's an alternative newspaper, but also El Sol, which is published twice a week, based in Salinas, but covers the entire county. Another demographic consideration for us is recognizing that the majority of or a significant portion, an average of over 60% of the community are actually renters, which is interesting. They're not owner occupied. And this is very different than many of the suburban communities that we see in other areas of Monterey County or even in the Bay Area where I spent most of my local government career. And how we reach out to renters is certainly different. They're not folks who necessarily are part of the community long-term, and some are. But we looked at it, the demographics of what these districts potentially look like from a renter standpoint versus owner occupied. You'll see here that some districts with over 70% or close to 70% renters. And some of that has to do with the transient population in our community. We have a community college, Monterey Peninsula College, based within the city, a graduate school, the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, as well as the Defense Language Institute. It's located on a US Army garrison that's completely within the city boundaries, as well as the Naval Postgraduate School. So with the not only the students, but also the faculty who usually are here for a few years, 2 years, no more than 3 at any given time, that does lend to a transient population. So how do we engage them through the decision-making process, and also recognizing that they're less likely to vote. So throughout this process, we ensured that we engaged with not only those who we believe may read the newspaper, or also are through digital advertisements, but also with the administrators at the various colleges and military institutions. And that was an important part of our inclusivity strategy, if you will. This gives us a little bit of a closer look at how concentrated some of the renter population is within different areas of the city. And knowing your neighborhoods is an important piece as well. We have a very strong group of neighborhood associations. You see these different color blocks. This represents 16 distinct neighborhoods within the city. And these are established neighborhoods that have representatives who form not only voting blocks, but also advocacy interests that then provide feedback to our city council through a program that's known as the Neighborhood and Community Improvement Program. And our both staff as well as members of our council attend regular neighborhood association meetings throughout the 16 distinct neighborhoods. And the 2 blank areas you see here, or 3 blank areas, are actually the military areas to the left. To the west is the Presidio of Monterey Army Garrison, and then the 2 areas to the right that are blank are US Navy land that's also within our jurisdiction. So how do we engage those neighborhoods is an important piece. And of course, recognizing that not everyone is active in their neighborhood association. So reaching out to the broadest population was a key piece as well. When we launched our district-based elections process, we made sure we used our website as a launching pad, but also the Have Your Say Monterey, which is a online engagement portal using the platform Michelle shared with all of you, which is Bang the Table, also known as Engagement HQ by Granicus. And the Have Your Say Monterey site was something that residents were very familiar with because we've used it for other engagement tools as well. So that was a clear engagement strategy that was helpful. This is the landing page for Have Your Say Monterey. You can see folks land on the page, and then we have featured projects as you scroll down. We recently went through a process on flavored tobacco and e-cigarette products, gathering feedback on this ban on vape products. And that was a helpful tool as well. You can see here, these are just some examples of other projects that we've used. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into the council election process and districting-based elections. But this is just a overview, and it's really helpful. You can see the graphics are help bring people in and help folks see what topics they may be interested in, whether that's a local coastal program. We are continuing to engage in the commercial cannabis roadmap over the last 2 years as we look at approving cannabis retail operations in the city, and other projects as well, whether they're transportation-based, street corridor, we have a regional park plan, sea level rise adaptation, or the library reopening strategy. So these are just some examples of what we've done. But as we look at the district-based elections, you'll notice that we were very deliberate in making sure there was information available both in English and Spanish. This is the landing page for using the Have Your Say tool, where we have a project timeline, all of the information also uploaded, whether information was being received in writing. We scanned them, made sure they were available. That was part of our digital strategy. If folks took an online survey, that information is available for viewers to download and read, as well as emails. Every single email about the district-based elections process that comes in, we actually convert to PDF and then upload, just to be transparent. It's part of our process. Other cities in our region have been accused of hiding information, perhaps from lobbying groups on certain topics, or special interest groups, quote unquote. And Our policy now is when we launch a new public engagement process, every message that comes in, whether it's one email to the mayor or to the city manager's office or to another staff member, we actually post it online for everyone to see. It's just being transparent and it's the right thing to do. So that's part of our inclusive strategy also. Now, not everything has to be, we recognize, you can't just do everything digitally and expect to have engagement. We've got to drive people back to the website, back to Have Your Say Monterey. So especially something as important as moving and transitioning to district-based elections, we issued a postcard mailer that was mailed to 15,000 households talking about the district-based elections process. You can see we have information both in English and Spanish, and direct people back to the haveyoursaymonterey.org website. Also have a phone number there and an email address for those who want to reach out to us. So with the timeline and the process. One big mistake that we made was we had some changes to the language. We actually worked with a translating company that was certified to translate information in English into Spanish. But then we made some adjustments, and unfortunately, it was a draft that got published using our initial translation tool, Google Translate. So highly recommend that you do not rely on Google Translate. It might help you with conversations with folks one-on-one, but really you need to go through a process and have an on-call translator who will translate the information for you. Otherwise, it'll be embarrassing and you'll have to send a second, like we did, a second set of postcards to 15,000 households. So it's important for all of you, and we're the language capital of the world, trademarked here in Monterey. So not something you want to do in your community. Another learning lesson for us, I think, a really helpful tool. We did, I think, a pretty good job of letting people know and promoting through postcards. We have a community information meeting and what that looks like. At the time, no in-person meetings, no hybrid meetings, strictly online. So had folks register. We also, of course, have information that we posted, as I mentioned earlier, advertisements in the Herald, in the Weekly, and also in El Sol, the Spanish language publication. And then, of course, as part of this effort, there were forms and other information. All of our agenda reports related to district-based elections and ordinances were translated into Spanish. We recognize that just over 3% of the population over age 5 had were Spanish speaking with limited English language fluency. Or proficiency. So that was one of the other thresholds as part of district-based elections that also had us convert everything into Spanish. And then last but not least, finding community partners and other ways to engage the public, aside from, in our case, stakeholders like the military, like our educational institutions, but finding the local partners. We do run a city library. Many of you may have a county-run library system. We had a map-making station where members of the public could go to the table and submit a community of interest form in English and Spanish, learn about the process, or draw their own maps, which we then scanned and then uploaded to the website. So that was a very helpful tool to help also not only provide digital engagement efforts, but also the in-person and bridge that gap between the two. And that was very helpful, especially for those who don't have internet access. Many of you may have data on the level of broadband access in your communities, and that's an important piece of how you bridge that gap. And how do you, if you do have more robust survey tools online, get folks access to the internet. So at our library, for example, we have over 6 laptops that are available for a loan that folks can check out with a library card and then use in the library, or over a dozen public library internet access stations where people could get access to that resource as well. So that's a summary of what we've done here in Monterey as part of the district-based elections process. I'm really looking forward to learning from our next speaker, because I don't think we necessarily have the answers. It's just one case study. We're still learning through the process. as we continue to try to engage with the public in a more inclusive way. But happy to share our story here in Monterey with all of you.
Thank you, Nat. We are definitely all learning from this process. And Nat, what's your case study is fascinating is that you've done some digital, and then you also pivoted, realizing who you're not reaching out. And another interesting thing is that your engagement was definitely data-driven. So back to what Michelle was saying, you have to know your audience. You have to know who to engage. You have to understand your, ethnic race composition in your community, and those groups who haven't been traditionally engaged, but you absolutely need to engage, not only for this engagement, but overall, create the culture and engagement and make sure that you're reaching out to them and engage them consistently. I think that data really helps you to identify those groups and figure out different groups to reach out to. We do have one clarifying question for you, Nat, from Marisa. She's asking, where can you find renter versus owner data?
That is a good question. I've got to go back and look. I will have to ask our consultants for the district-based elections process. They're the ones who gather that information. There's some renter data that you'll be able to find. It's raw data from the U.S. Census Bureau. They have their community survey. It's called the ACS, American Community Survey, that has estimates. That data is probably the best bet because they go down to the census blocks and the census tracts with estimates on what percentage based on each census tract is either owner occupied or renter occupied. And then using that raw data, our consultants, redistricting partners, in this case, for district-based elections, helped us create some maps that were helpful. We also have a GIS team that was able to do some of that work as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Nat, I'm going to ask you a few follow-up questions, and maybe in the next minute or two, let's see if we can provide responses. And if not, we'll answer in the chat. So how did Monterey address translation for its Asian diaspora of community members?
Yeah, the data shows for us, even though we have a 15%, I think it was the estimate of AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander populations. There were very, very, very few who were not English speakers. So at that point, we didn't feel like there was a need, unlike, we'll hear from Jennifer, her example, there is a community, I think the Hmong community, so that may not have as much English proficiency. So for us, that wasn't as much of a priority, but we do have some groups like the Japanese, one of the oldest Japanese American civic leagues in the country here. We actually also had, a lot of people don't know, here in Monterey, the largest before the gold rush, the largest Chinese population in the entire United States here in Monterey, fishing community. And so we engaged with various stakeholders through that process, but we don't have any Asian languages publications here in the city of newspapers or other media.
Great. Thank you for that answer. So definitely you guys, you have connected with those folks and still exploring how to build those better connections. And the very last question before I move into our next speaker, and thank you for all your comments, by the way, folks. We see them all and we'll address some of them in the facilitated discussion. Another follow-up question for you, Nat. What was the participation level of the Spanish-only speaking Latino population?
There, and that's one of the other pieces. It was pretty low. We had a few Spanish only, but not a lot. And I think even though this was a tool and we had outreach in El Sol, I wish we had greater engagement from the Spanish only population. So we only had a handful.
Again, and this is back to the engagement is not easy. Engagement is hard, and we are doing our best to translate materials and reaching out, and we need to continue doing it. And I think it's a great pivot into Jennifer's case study with the Merced, how they were pivoting and tripling their efforts to make sure they reach out folks who haven't been engaged and whatnot. Again, take it easy, folks. I know you're doing a lot. I know you're working very hard to reach all different audiences and stakeholders in your community. And sometimes it's just not easy and intuitive and requires way more staff time, intentionality, and whatnot. Michelle, we've been looking at the very beautiful roses at the city of Merced. Not Michelle, Jennifer Flachman. I'm gonna pass it to you.
Thank you. So hi, my name is Jennifer Blackman. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Merced. I joined the city about a year ago. Before that, I spent 22 years or a little over 20 years with a national moving company. We were a public company, a publicly traded company with over 18,000 locations across the United States and Canada. And then in between that time and here, I worked for the Boys and Girls Club of America and ran a club on the Central Coast in California. So my main goal with all of, and I've been a communicator in those positions, sometimes crisis communications, but more so community engagement and outreach. And so when I came to Merced, my first project was to establish a community engagement program for ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and a spending plan on our council's direction. And before I get to that, I just want to say thank you to everyone that does what I do, because it's a 25-hour-a-week job. And I make it that way because I want to be engaged with our community. But thank you so much for serving the communities that you serve. So my first project when I got here was an ARPA funding spending plan. We didn't have a platform. We had, our internet, and we had Microsoft products. So I worked with our IT department to create a platform. But before I did that, I created a strategy. And I'm from this area, so I recognize who our stakeholders are and the different communities that we serve. Sorry, my ring is going off. And so my first order of business was to understand who our stakeholders are and to get in touch with all of the representatives or advocates or activists, organizers that represent our communities, so that I could understand how they expect me to communicate with them. And online is a small component of our efforts for community outreach. It establishes a launching pad for us so that it provides a central location for us to house all our material. So when we go out and engage with the community, we can have them come back and know that this is centralized, that our surveys are on our website, or engagement HQ, bang the table is what we use. And so my first order of business was to understand how people expect us to communicate with them. We have a robust culture here. We have a Hmong community. And what I found with our Hmong community is that if they speak English as a second language, they are computer literate, meaning they can read English on the computer. If they tend not to, then we can't expect them to use our tools to communicate with them. So my job is a lot of time out of the office and getting in touch with neighborhood groups, people that represent those communities. We have translation services, and we use the folks that help us translate our documents to reach out to those communities. Our Parks and Recs department, they have a huge following. So talking with the director of Parks and Recs on how he gets that information out to communities outside of our online efforts. So I wish we would have had an engagement platform when I did the ARPA project, but we did a combination of things so that we reached as many stakeholders as we could so that they can help us develop, or they could have helped us develop a spending plan. And so we built a website or a web page based on Microsoft platform. We were familiar with the platform and the forms, but they weren't as user-friendly as we needed them to be. And like Nat said, Google Translate wasn't a friend of ours. So we worked with our translation services. We have vendors that translate documents for us to get documents translated. We posted those online, but we also did grassroots outreach. And that meant going to community events. I used, it's called Nextdoor. Well, I used Nextdoor and posted on Nextdoor for, I'm looking for neighborhood associations that I can attend and learn from. And so I was invited to neighborhood associations. I went to our Parks and Recs events at our local parks and the kids' activities that we had, because parents go to watch their kids. And so I wasn't shuffling paperwork at those activities, but I was meeting with people and learning about their communities or our communities so that I can better engage with people that don't use the internet. And
Jennifer, I'm going to pause you for just a moment. Just
Sure.
want to make sure we are advancing slides.
I'm not, yeah, I have 3
Not yet.
slides. I'm not a
Not
big
yet.
slide person.
Okay, folks, for
So,
those of you who
There
are
we
more,
go.
for those of you who are more auditory learners versus visual, this is for you. There's less visual, more auditory.
Yeah,
Just wanted to double check.
thank you. So, one of the things that we learned, thank you, Hannah. One of the things that we learned is even if you build it, you need to make sure they know how to get there and how to show up. And so knowing who all our stakeholders are is the first step. And then knowing how to communicate with stakeholders is the second step. And this platform allowed us to create content that we could print or push out or share with our communities that had access to the internet. So we're a disadvantaged community, and I'm not quite sure of the percentage. It's between 30 or I think 20% of folks that don't use the internet regularly or don't have access to the internet in their home. So we wanted to be sure that we knew how to engage with those people. We asked engagement of our council so that when they went out to community activities in their districts, they brought flyers and they communicated with the folks that they report to. So we use this as a resource. We listened for opportunities. We created clear and simple messaging. And so I even talk to organizers or activists and show them information and ask them what they expect and how they could help us get to the audience that they have. And so that element of transparency came in, but it really was grassroots from my offices, from my office to get out and hit the pavement and visit local business owners, because they also have access to community members. So we did 2 projects. We had 2 projects on our website, and one was a local measure, a local sales tax measure. And we needed to get people engaged to understand what that sales tax, it's getting ready to sunset in 2026. And so we want community members to know that that's going to come up possibly on a ballot and what that means for our community. We also offered a stimulus program to residents. Council approved of ARPA funding, a stimulus payment program to essential workers. And so we put those 2 projects on Engaged Merced, which is the Engagement HQ platform. And the analytics are easy to grab and report on. And we had 2 different outcomes from the 2 projects that we have. So Keeping Merced, Working Healthy, Safe, a community conversation. We had a couple thousand people engaged with us. We had a community survey that asked them to prioritize functions that the city performs that are important to them, 911 services, streets, maintaining streets. There were a list of questions that we asked folks to prioritize. And so we had, I think, about 2,000 people engage with us there. The second project we did was the resident stimulus program. We had about 15,000 people engage with us there. And so that's because it was a stimulus check program, and people are trying to get back on their feet from the pandemic. And so there was a ton of engagement there. We did the same amount of outreach for each program that we put out there. We printed flyers, we sent flyers, we engaged with the community, we asked council to help us engage with stakeholders. And we realized that the ask or the ROI on the stimulus program was greater than the ROI for the excuse me, for the first project. And so we learned from that we need to continue engagement throughout, even when we don't have projects. And so the takeaways that I got from that is to continue to keep people engaged in the different resources that we have. I've worked with the media for over 22 years. And so I recognize that they're going to call us when they need information about a story, but I continue to give media information about the good things that happen in our community. So every Monday, I reach out to the producer or the local beat reporter with good news. People like to hear good news. People like to know when Public Works is fixing streets or replacing streetlights or cleaning up community parks for the weekend. So it's a lot of grassroots effort on my office part to keep people engaged. And so it's not just the engagement during the project, it's the engagement throughout the year. And things like we have an insert in our utility bill that we send out. It's a monthly newsletter. And so we're giving people kind of a heads up on things that we have going on in the upcoming month. We use that to continue to keep people engaged. We have, I'm trying to think of other things that I wrote down. We have our Parks and Recs department that is engaged with the community. So we use those folks as a resource. We have a local zoo. So however we can continue engaging people outside of the projects that we need the engagement with, we're going to continue to do. And I just feel like the things that I've learned from creating these engagement projects is knowing who your stakeholders are, being able to identify those folks, how to reach them. And this is a platform for reaching folks, but going out into the community is probably going to allow you to get better return on the platform that you have. We have a community academy that our local police department has started. And so getting information out during those types of functions. So any chance we get to talk about community engagement and what the city is doing for residents, we take advantage of that. And it's anywhere from posting on social media to hanging up flyers, to going to community groups, to talking with to faith-based organizations. Any chance we get, we are going to try to attempt to engage with the community because everybody's busy and we can't expect folks to log on to the cityofmerced.org to see what's up. So we recognize that the effort has to come from us. There are a couple of other things that I'm just tweaking as I'm learning along the way. So on my signature on my email, I have engage.cityofmerced.org. so that when that goes out to people, if they catch it, maybe it'll pique their interest to go to our site. So there are all kinds of things. We also have a youth council, and I forgot to bring this up. So we have a youth council, and one of the stakeholders or the stakeholder groups is our youth. And more youth are attending our council meetings and may want a voice. And so learning how to communicate and what works with them. And so our youth and in our school districts, how do they get their information? We use Peach Jar, I think, is what our school district used to get information out to families. And then we also at times have used the announcements just to talk about our youth council and get them engaged with youth council, that youth council can share the information about the projects that we have. And so basically it boils down to knowing who your stakeholders are and really understanding how to get out and engage with your stakeholders. And this online platform has allowed us a launching pad to do that.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. I think you're hitting on a very important points. Digital engagement is not the answer to everything. It still has to be boots on the ground. But what digital engagement allows you, and especially when you bring all your public engagement projects into one website, such as Engage Merced, you start building the culture of engagement where your audience know where to go to engage, to submit comments, to have a dialogue, to find people who are engaging and what's not.
Yeah, I think that when you were putting out the questionnaire about, rating yourself on how you engage, I think we have a lot of work to do. I mean, we have the tools and we have the knowledge. It's just we need to get out more and be visible more and allow our community to trust us that we are out to share information that is important to them with the projects that we have posted on this platform.
That's great. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you all for comments and questions in the Q&A. We see you all, and we are going to answer some of the questions live, and some of the questions we're answering as we go. There are a lot of you, so thank you for your patience. Okay, I'm gonna pass it to Roberto, who's just gonna help us to wrap this virtual engagement strategy presentations up and share some reflections.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, good afternoon now, everyone. Roberto Carlos Torres, I'm the Senior Program Manager at the Institute for Local Government. But actually prior to joining ILG, I worked for over a decade as a community organizer here in San Diego, and then actually worked at the City of San Diego as their climate equity specialist. So having a little bit of that background and of doing some of this work really informed kind of the information that I'll share with you next. So if we can go on to the next slide there. So you've heard a lot of great examples specifically from Monterey and Merced on ways to engage with our marginalized communities. In San Diego, we often refer to them as communities of concern. There are many ways to identify our communities, right? And so thinking of kind of identifying best practices, and Michelle was able to talk about a few of them, but as we hear from Monterey and what they did, it's definitely step one is about needing to be intentional, right? Either at the beginning, hopefully at the beginning of your engagement efforts, but even as you're moving along and analyzing kind of how the engagement has been so far. If we're ever talking about trying to engage communities that have historically not been engaged in the process, it's going to require a very intentional approach to be able to do it. And your first step really is to analyze what barriers are present in the community that could be preventing folks from engaging. You want to think about asking questions like, is the engagement accounting for different schedules, right? Are we thinking of it being accessible to non-English speakers? And also, how much time are we asking people to spend with us, right? These are just a few of the questions that you want to think about as you're thinking about the barriers to engagement and kind of the benefits that I'll get into of virtual engagement, really help address and overcome many of these variables. Now, of course, kind of the best way to overcome these barriers is to hear from the community itself, and community-based organizations are really great at understanding and identifying the barriers for the communities that they represent. So oftentimes, and whenever possible, it's important to really work with and compensate for engaging the community, having community-based organizations engage with you and really help bring the community along when you're either looking to do virtual engagement or a kind of a hybrid mix, right? Now, like we talked a lot, digital engagement or virtual engagement can really help you increase your access, but there's also a digital divide and something that can be a major barrier, particularly post-pandemic, in how we have changed how we engage folks, right? The benefit of virtual engagement, though, is that it is very mobile and able to help you go to the community, right? Before the pandemic, or as things are being opened up and you're able to have more in-person events, being able to not hold your own town hall, if you will, but be able to go where the community is already at was always a benefit. You still want to do that even in the virtual space, right? You can take a tablet or even a smartphone to do a survey so that you're connecting to folks who may not be technologically savvy or really face that digital divide and don't have access to the internet. And then really you want to, anytime that you're engaging with someone new, you want to be able to build that strong relationship, but that can only be successful if you are building trust and that trust is being nurtured, right? So you have to plan on having open and transparent communication. This won't only build the trust, but it'll ensure that as you're trying to engage more and more people, that they're going to trust in the process and in the system and be able to open it up to even more people engaging, right? Now, I will always tell you that you're not going to have 100% agreement in all of the engagement that you do, but with the open and transparent communication, you will be able to build trust so that folks will, while they may disagree with some of the decisions that are moving forward, will be able to trust that they were heard and that the best option is selected moving forward. So these are always the best things to kind of keep in mind about working with marginalized communities and being able to reach out to them. And on the next slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about just how virtual tools can really help you, right? They provide ultimate flexibility, right? Like I mentioned, the realities of COVID changed the landscape of how agencies engage residences, but it's not a bad change, right? The benefits are abundant, from providing that flexibility to residents, to also being relatively low in cost and having that mobility that I talked about, and really supporting that open and transparent communication that will build trust with these communities, right? They are probably not engaged in your agency previously because of some form of mistrust. Virtual tools can really help hold you accountable as you're putting out there your project timelines. You're putting out there how input and information is going to be shared and co-developed with the community. And you're really able to use that as a transparency tool, similar to what Monterey's example showed us is possible of what you can do. And it's also, with that flexibility, you're able to make really quick changes, like fixing a typo online or even just keeping things up to date. It's really important to be able to leverage the tools that we have, and these virtual tools can really help make it easy and make your agency more accessible to our marginalized communities. And that mobility is so important, right? Being able to take a tablet or a smartphone to get a survey, or to direct folks on your technology in a community event. because that digital divide is very real. And it's important to understand how that impacts your community as you're planning out and thinking of how to engage folks. So really wanted to just kind of talk about those things today, but I will pass it back to Hannah.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberto, for helping us to wrap up, kind of summarize digital engagement is here, it's here to stay, but what do we need to think through if we wanted to ensure that our engagement is equitable and we're reaching out communities that we need to reach that don't traditionally engage. Let me change our view. And I will ask our panelists maybe to turn their cameras all on, if you don't mind. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Nat. And hi, Jennifer. All right, thank you so much for your presentation. And we have about 15 minutes. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A box. Thank you to our participants for participating. I do want to ask you a few questions because I think it's really good to build up on what you were presenting so we can learn a little bit more. So with Monterey and Merced examples, how did you define success for your engagement efforts? And have you used any evaluation methods to do that?
So I'll answer. On my experience, I've learned to ask for feedback, and I think feedback is always going to be critical. And I don't mean that negatively, but I think we have such a diverse group of stakeholders, or we have such a diverse community of stakeholders, that we are not going to be able to ask the right question to all of our stakeholders. And so I've found that listening to what might work better and writing that information down, but meeting with stakeholders. So I think that in answer to your question, the feedback, the more feedback we get, I think that allows me to measure success because we're engaging with people. So if I get feedback, that means I've engaged with someone. And so whether I like the feedback is another, is kind of a personal issue, but what I do with that feedback for the upcoming project or for my engagement outreach processes is where that will come in handy. And so, the platform provides all kinds of ways to analyze engagement, and it's got great data that you can pull from. But I think my background as a communicator is to get out and listen to what I've done wrong or what my success has been, and then incorporate that into my upcoming projects.
That's great. So digital tools provide this analytical number, data, whatnot, and then what Jennifer is saying, your qualitative approach is also important. Talk to your community, see how, if they think that effort has been successful or not. ILG also has what we call a rapid review worksheets on our website. It's a resource that I will share in the follow-up email, and it also has a number of questions that help you to evaluate success of your public meetings and public engagement projects from the perspective of participants and your perspective. Nat, how did you know your engagement effort was successful?
It's a good question. And for us, I tried responding in writing to using the Q&A feature here in Zoom. And I mean, for us, looking at how many people did we reach both in person and digitally with the different tool surveys, emails, we always provide a summary to the City Council on the different methods as part of our reporting out on feedback. Is what different methods did folks engage with us in? Did they take the survey? Did they email us? Did they send us a text message? Whatever it might be, so that there's a list. I think that's helpful. We haven't looked at benchmark specific numbers, but I think it's a challenge, and I would like to say that there's always more that we can do as practitioners, but as long as we're being intentional, we're being deliberate with our work, to me, that's a win. So, we're moving the needle, we're moving forward with the resources we have. I know many of our budgets are limited and we can't afford full page ads in the paper. We have limitations on on what we can do. But as long as we're deliberate and we also take the time after going through each process, whether it's a project or a policy issue, debrief and say, what could we have done better so that we can use those learning lessons in our communities for the next project. I think that's a helpful tool as we look at the evaluation piece of our work and measuring success.
Great, thank you for that. Roberto and Michelle, any quick thoughts on that to add?
There's so many good questions.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next question. We did have a question about working with the community-based organizations or community partners. And Jennifer, looks like you touched a little bit on, working with your local community-based organizations. What advice do you have for local governments looking to form those partnerships and looking to bring them into their engagement projects and collaborate and partner?
So being new to government, I went to United Way, I went to faith-based organizations, I went to our community service organizations, I spoke at Kiwanis, I spoke at Rotary, and all of those folks are business owners or, business leaders. And I asked, how to further engage with them or how to, reach out. And so it's a question, and to me, it's simply asking. And, we do have more and more, we have organizers or activists that attend our council meetings, and, they have an agenda. And I've talked with them and asked them, these are the things we're using to reach out to our stakeholders. And you have stakeholders. How can we reach out and share our message? Although our message might be different, but how can we share our message with the stakeholders that you're representing? And so I feel like it's my responsibility to understand who the thought leaders are in our community and how to get out in front of them. We have a board of realtors. How do we get out in front of them? So,
and I think the way to find out is just talk to them, talk to your community and ask their advice. They're very appreciative if you're asking them, how should I do it? Or what's the best way to, collaborate with you? We have another excellent question. And
Hannah, I'm going to add just a little bit to that one, which is when you use a digital approach, because the resource savings are there, if you have a relationship with those community-based organizations, lifting them up by providing them resources, like you don't have to do all the engagement. They have an audience, they have a community that they're building. And oftentimes these are underfunded nonprofit neighborhood groups. And some cities I speak to are very much of the, well, how would we decide that they could use our own platform? Aren't there rules against that? And it's like, well, there probably are rules, but why are those rules there? And what is the benefit of saying, we've got an engagement site, it doesn't cost us anything to give this group a page. It's their time to put, to do those resources, and we get the benefit of the data, and we've developed a partnership. So finding, going deeper and providing those resources is another way to connect.
Absolutely. Talk to your community. You do not know all the answers. They do. Talk to them. Roberto, I think this question, you have a wealth of knowledge on this question, and I'm thinking about certain examples that you worked in you had in your work. Here's the question. We've used a range of virtual and in-person outreach strategies, but continue to have very low participation by Spanish-only residents in our virtual efforts. And I think everyone on the phone can relate. Any specific virtual strategies that had high participation from marginalized communities? And I think back to what Ned is saying, we've done a lot, we reached out, we translated and whatnot, and we're still having low participation. What do we do?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge that is faced by almost any city or jurisdiction, right? When looking to engage. I think it's important to assess what is the outreach and engagement look like prior to that event and seeing who your community partners are. I mean, I think if you take one thing away from this webinar, aside from the virtual tools, it's that really it's very important to be able to connect with the community, either through community-based organizations or community leaders, to understand what are those barriers or needs so that you can see an increase in participation, right? And because things to consider, you can have Spanish interpretation, but if you have a very large Spanish-speaking community, why not have just a Spanish webinar in its own? And then if you want English speakers, have English interpretation for folks, right? But what was successful in the city of San Diego was actually partnering with a local organization called Casa Familiar. And they had what they call promotoras, which are pretty community liaisons out there that only spoke Spanish and were able to go out into the community and talk to folks to really increase the participation. And we saw an increase tenfold in the city when we were able to work with them, because they knew where the Spanish speaking community was. They already had those connections and were really able to leverage that community expertise to get them involved in our effort for the climate action plan update. So really, number one, it's work with the CBOs that have that trust in the community, that know the community, to, if you're struggling, to identify the barriers and then be able to pivot your strategy, or to just leverage their expertise and have them partner with you in the effort.
And I'm going to jump on that one too. Finding them, involving them, but more taking a step back and saying, are we missing voices from the conversation? And if so, pausing your engagement effort to go find those folks and making a big deal. This project stopped because we didn't hear from all the voices. Now we're going to go find those voices and say, and part of that is closing the loop, right? When we go out to communities and think about your own engagement, when you've filled out a survey or when you've participated in an effort, was there a result from your effort? If our communities are not participating, is it because they didn't see a value, a return on their investment? And if that's the case, how can you create mini wins, right? Is it a small block party? Is it a small event? Is it a thing that shows we heard, here was our answer, now come back again and help us do the heavy lifting?
Absolutely. Nat, Jennifer, anything to add?
I just want to thank you because I've learned a lot from this, but I hope that that we've been able to provide some insight. I just think that grassroots is the best way to get out and engage with community, and using, learning what those resources are to get to all of our stakeholders, or the majority of our stakeholders, will allow our virtual platform to flourish.
Likewise, I think, the other group I hesitated to mention earlier, but I did mention in the Q&A response, was the faith-based organizations. There's a lot of community groups focus around and circle around places of worship, and connecting with those leaders too can help reach out to marginalized populations.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we're at 12:28, we have 2 minutes left. Let me do my wrap up. I would like to thank you to our co-host, Engagement HQ at Granicus, and Michelle Stevens, who works there. Michelle is a wealth of knowledge, wealth of information. Feel free to reach out to her and just pick her brain and ask more questions. I'd like to say thank you to my colleague Roberto at the Institute for Local Governments for jumping in and sharing his wisdom and knowledge. And Nat, and who am I missing?
Jennifer had to jump, I think.
Jennifer, I was like, where's Jennifer? Ned and Jennifer, thank you so much for being here and sharing your lessons learned and whatnot. Okay, at the Institute for Local Government, we have a lot of free resources for you. It's all on the website. Our tiers public engagement framework that guides you through your planning and implementation of your public engagement efforts are on our website. We do loan interpretation equipment. If you need equipment for simultaneous translation at your public meetings, which are in-person public meetings, reach out to me and we'll go from there. And as I mentioned, tip sheets and resources are on our website. Check it out. If you're not following us on any of the social media platforms, I highly encourage you do. We do a lot of webinars, trainings, publish resources, convenings, and whatnot. Again, thank you for joining. The contact information for Nat, Jennifer, Michelle, and Roberto are here. Feel free to reach out to ILG staff at any time. We're here for you. And I think Nat, Jennifer, and Michelle will welcome the follow-up questions as well. With that, have the great rest of your afternoon. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks, Roberto. Appreciate it.